The morning fog hung heavy over Foxborough as James Mitchell pushed his maintenance cart through the empty corridors of Gillette Stadium. At 52, his weathered hands gripped the cart's handle with the same determination that once held an M4 rifle in the deserts of Iraq. The prosthetic leg beneath his right knee clicked softly against the polished concrete floor, a rhythmic reminder of the IED that had changed everything 14 years ago. James had been working as a maintenance supervisor at the stadium for 8 years now, arriving before dawn and leaving well after sunset. Most employees barely noticed him, just another face in the sea of stadium workers who kept the Patriots' home gleaming. But James didn't mind the invisibility. After the chaos of war and the painful years of rehabilitation that followed, anonymity felt like a blessing. "Morning, James," called out Linda Rodriguez, the head of concessions, as she hurried past with her clipboard. She was one of the few who always acknowledged him, her warm smile a brief ray of sunshine in his otherwise solitary routine. "Morning, Linda," he replied with a nod, his voice still carrying traces of his Alabama roots despite decades in Massachusetts. As James methodically cleaned each section, his mind wandered to the upcoming game against the Buffalo Bills. Sunday games were his favorite days to work, not because of the chaos or the crowds, but because of the electric energy that filled the air. Even empty, Gillette Stadium seemed to pulse with anticipation on game days. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his 17-year-old son Tyler. "Can't make it to dinner Sunday, got plans with friends." James stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Understood. Be safe." The divorce from his ex-wife Rebecca had been finalized 3 years ago, but the distance between him and Tyler had been growing long before the papers were signed. The boy barely knew the man who had left for Iraq when Tyler was just 3 years old. The father who came back was different, quieter, more distant, carrying invisible wounds that made it hard to connect with his own family. James pocketed the phone and continued his work, pushing the cart toward the players' tunnel. This was his sanctuary, the long corridor that led to the field where his heroes played every Sunday. The walls were lined with championship banners and photographs of legendary Patriots moments. Tom Brady's 6 Super Bowl victories, the perfect 16-0 regular season, Malcolm Butler's goal line interception. Each image represented a piece of magic that James had only experienced from his couch at home or through brief glimpses when his work brought him close to the field. As he mopped the tunnel floor, James allowed himself a rare smile. In a few hours, this same corridor would echo with the thunderous steps of Patriots players charging onto the field. Bill Belichick himself would walk these floors, his mind focused on the game plan that could lead to another victory. James had seen Coach Belichick many times over the years, always impressed by the man's intensity and focus. There was something about the coach that reminded James of his commanding officers in Iraq, that single-minded dedication to the mission, that refusal to accept anything less than excellence. "You're here early today," came a voice behind him. James turned to see David Parker, the head groundskeeper, approaching with his usual pre-game checklist in hand. David was in his mid-40s, with the kind of permanent tan that came from years working outdoors. Unlike most stadium employees, David had always shown genuine interest in James's military background. "Same time as always," James replied, wringing out his mop. "Just trying to make sure everything's perfect for the game." "You know, James, I've been thinking," David said, leaning against the tunnel wall. "You've been here 8 years, and I don't think I've ever seen you actually watch a game from the stands. Don't you ever want to see the Patriots play from a fan's perspective instead of just working during the games?" James shrugged. "Tickets are expensive. Besides, I can catch the highlights later." "That's not the same thing, man. There's nothing like being in those stands when the crowd goes wild. The energy, the noise, it's incredible." "Maybe someday," James said, though they both knew he had no intention of spending his limited income on game tickets. David studied James for a moment, seeming to sense the deeper reasons behind his reluctance. "Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. I might be able to work something out." As David walked away, James returned to his cleaning, but the conversation stayed with him. The truth was, he had always dreamed of watching a Patriots game from the stands, of being part of that sea of red, white, and blue jerseys. cheering alongside thousands of other fans. But dreams felt like luxuries he couldn't afford, not just financially, but emotionally. The stadium began to come alive around him as other employees arrived for their shifts. James made his way to the upper concourse, where massive windows offered a view of the parking lots already beginning to fill with tailgating fans. Even from this distance, he could see the smoke from grills and the colorful tents that transformed the asphalt into a temporary city of Patriots faithful. His radio crackled to life. "James, we need you in Section 112. Spill cleanup." "On my way," he responded, grateful for the distraction. As he navigated the stadium's maze of corridors toward Section 112, James passed the Patriots Hall of Fame. Through the glass doors, he could see displays honoring the team's greatest players and moments. He paused for just a moment, remembering the day he had snuck in during a quiet afternoon to walk through the exhibits. Standing before the display case containing Brady's jerseys and championship rings, James had felt a connection to something larger than himself. The same feeling he had experienced serving his country, the sense of being part of something important and enduring. Section 112 turned out to be a minor soda spill near the concession stand, easily handled with a few paper towels. But as James worked, he noticed a woman in her 30s sitting alone in the nearby seats, typing intently on her laptop. She had shoulder-length auburn hair and wore a press credential around her neck that identified her as Sarah Coleman from the Boston Sports Tribune. "Excuse me," she said, looking up from her computer. "You work here regularly, right?" "Yes, ma'am," James replied, straightening up. "Is there something you need?" "Actually, I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. I'm working on a piece about the unsung heroes who make Patriots game days possible. The people behind the scenes who keep everything running smoothly." James felt his chest tighten. Attention was the last thing he wanted. "I don't think I'm the right person for that kind of story, ma'am. I just clean up around here." "That's exactly why you're the right person," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Mind if I sit here for a minute? I promise it won't take long." Before James could politely decline, Sarah had already pulled out a chair from behind the concession counter. There was something disarming about her enthusiasm, and James found himself reluctantly agreeing to answer a few questions. "How long have you worked here?" she asked, her pen poised over a notepad. 8 years. "What's your favorite part of the job?" James considered the question. "I guess making sure everything's ready for the fans. When people come here, they're usually celebrating something, a birthday, an anniversary, just time with family. I like knowing I played a small part in making their experience better." Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's beautiful. Do you have a family of your own?" The question hit James like a punch to the gut. "I have a son," he said quietly. "Tyler. He's 17. Does he come to games with you?" "No," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. We don't really do things together much anymore." Sarah seemed to sense she had touched on something painful. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." "It's okay," James said, though it clearly wasn't. "Is that all you need? I should get back to work." "Just one more question," Sarah said gently. "What brings you the most joy about working here?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with cheering fans. "I served in Iraq," he said finally. 3 tours. When I came back, everything felt different, disconnected. But this place, this team, there's something pure about it. The way the fans come together, the way they believe in something bigger than themselves. It reminds me why I fought over there. To protect things like this, communities, traditions, the freedom to cheer for your team on Sunday afternoon." Sarah stopped writing and looked up at James with new understanding. She noticed for the first time the slight limp in his step, the way he favored his left leg, the distant look in his eyes that spoke of experiences most people couldn't imagine. "Thank you for your service," she said, and James could tell she meant it. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. As Sarah packed up her things, she paused. "James, would you mind if I kept in touch? I have a feeling there's more to your story. James shook his head. I told you, ma'am, I'm not really story material. I'm just maintenance. Sometimes the best stories are about people who don't think they're stories, Sarah said, handing him her business card. Think about it, okay? After she left, James stood alone in section 112, turning the business card over in his hands. Part of him wanted to throw it away. He had spent years building walls around his past, creating a life of quiet routine that kept the memories at bay. But another part of him, a part he had almost forgotten existed, was curious about what this journalist had seen in him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of pre-game preparations. James cleaned restrooms, restocked concession stands, and made sure every inch of the stadium gleamed under the bright lights. By the time the gates opened and fans began streaming in, he had retreated to his usual game day position in the maintenance office, monitoring radio communications and responding to any issues that arose. But for once, instead of burying himself in busy work, James found himself watching the security monitors that showed different areas of the stadium. He watched families walking through the concourses, their faces bright with excitement. He saw groups of friends sharing nachos and arguing good-naturedly about the team's chances. He observed fathers teaching their young sons about football, pointing out players during warm-ups, and explaining the nuances of the game. And for the first time in years, James Mitchell allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to be one of those fans, instead of just the invisible man who cleaned up after them. As the Patriots took the field for kickoff and 65,000 voices rose in unison, James closed his eyes and listened to the sound of pure joy echoing through the stadium he had helped maintain. In that moment, surrounded by the celebration of strangers, he felt a tiny spark of something he had thought was lost forever. Hope. Sarah Coleman couldn't shake the image of James Mitchell from her mind as she drove home from Gillette Stadium that evening. The Patriots had won 28-14, and her article about game day operations was practically writing itself, but it was the quiet maintenance worker who dominated her thoughts. In her 12 years as a sports journalist, Sarah had interviewed countless athletes, coaches, and celebrities. She had covered Super Bowls, championship parades, and career-defining moments. But there was something about James's gentle dignity and unspoken pain that had touched her in a way that professional success stories never could. Her apartment in Cambridge was small but cozy, filled with books and framed photographs from her various assignments. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and opened her laptop, intending to work on the maintenance article. Instead, she found herself researching James Mitchell. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. A Google search for James Mitchell, Iraq veteran, Massachusetts, yielded several results, including a 2009 article from the Boston Globe about local veterans returning from deployment. There was James, 14 years younger and in his army dress uniform, standing beside his then-wife Rebecca and 3-year-old son Tyler at a homecoming ceremony at Fort Devens. The article was brief but revealing. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, 38, lost his right leg below the knee when his convoy hit an IED outside Fallujah in 2009. After 18 months of rehabilitation at Walter Reed Medical Center, he was medically retired from the Army and returned to Massachusetts to begin the challenging process of rebuilding his civilian life. Sarah found herself scrolling through additional search results. A 2011 piece about veteran unemployment mentioned James briefly. He had been struggling to find work despite his military experience and was enrolled in a job training program for disabled veterans. There was a 2013 mention in a local paper about his divorce being finalized, though the article was mostly about Rebecca Mitchell's new career as a real estate agent and barely mentioned James at all. After 2013, the trail went cold. No more news articles, no social media presence, no public appearances. It was as if James Mitchell had deliberately faded from public view, content to live his life in the shadows. Sarah closed her laptop and stared out her window at the Boston skyline. She had built her career on finding the human stories behind the sports headlines, the personal struggles and triumphs that gave meaning to wins and losses. But this felt different. This felt important in a way that went beyond her professional ambitions. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Boston Sports Tribune office with a new sense of purpose. Her editor, Michael Thompson, was a former sports writer himself who had transitioned to management after 20 years on the beat. He was tough but fair, and Sarah respected his judgment. "Thompson," she called out as she knocked on his office door. "Got a minute?" "Always got time for my best feature writer," Michael said, gesturing for her to sit down. "How'd the stadium operations piece turn out?" "Good. I'll have it to you by end of day," Sarah said. "But I wanted to talk to you about something else. I met someone yesterday who might be perfect for a feature story." Michael leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." Sarah told him about her encounter with James Mitchell, carefully explaining his military background and current role at Gillette Stadium. She described the quiet dignity she had sensed in him, the clear pain of a man struggling to reconnect with his civilian life and his own family. "It's got all the elements," she concluded. "Military service, sacrifice, the challenge of coming home, and the healing power of sports community. Plus, with Veterans Day coming up next month, the timing is perfect." Michael was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen against his desk. "What's the angle?" "I mean, veteran struggles to adjust. That's been done 1,000 times. What makes this different?" "I think there's more to his story," Sarah said. 8 years he's been working at that stadium, showing up every day, taking pride in his work even though most people don't even see him. There's something beautiful about that dedication, that quiet service. And I have a feeling that if we tell his story right, it could make a real difference, not just for him, but for other veterans who are struggling with the same issues. You said he didn't want to be interviewed. "He was reluctant," Sarah admitted. "But I think if I approach it right, if I show him that this isn't about exploiting his story, but about honoring it, he might be willing to talk." Michael nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm intrigued. But Coleman, this has to be more than just a puff piece about a veteran janitor. If you're going to do this, you need to find the real story, the deeper truth about what it means to serve your country and then come home to a world that's moved on without you." "I know exactly what you mean," Sarah said. "And I think James Mitchell is the perfect person to tell that story." "All right, take a week, see what you can develop. But remember, if he doesn't want to participate, we respect that. The last thing we want to do is re-traumatize a veteran who's already been through enough." Sarah spent the rest of the day finishing her stadium operations article, but her mind kept drifting to James. She found herself wondering about his relationship with his son, about the marriage that had ended, about the daily struggle of living with a disability while trying to maintain his dignity and purpose. That evening, she drove back to Gillette Stadium. She knew James worked late most nights, and she hoped to catch him during a quiet moment. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars belonging to night shift workers and security personnel. Sarah badged her way into the stadium using her press credentials and made her way to the maintenance office. Through the glass window, she could see James sitting at a desk, filling out what appeared to be work orders or inventory reports. He looked tired, his shoulders hunched with the weight of another long day. She knocked gently on the door. James looked up, surprise flickering across his face when he recognized her. "Ms. Coleman," he said, opening the door. "What are you doing here so late?" "I was hoping I could talk to you again," Sarah said, "about what we discussed yesterday." James sighed and stepped back, allowing her to enter the small office. "Ma'am, I told you, I'm not really story material. What if I told you that telling your story might help other veterans who are going through the same struggles you've faced?" Sarah asked. "What if it could make a difference?" "I don't know what difference you think I could make," James said, returning to his desk. "I'm just trying to get through each day, same as anyone else." Sarah pulled up a chair across from him. "James, in the past 12 years, I've interviewed Hall of Fame quarterbacks, championship coaches, Olympic athletes, people who are considered heroes by millions of fans. But yesterday, when you talked about serving your country and protecting the freedom to cheer for your team on Sunday afternoon, that was one of the most profound things anyone has ever said to me." James looked uncomfortable. "I was just talking." "No, you were sharing your truth. And there are thousands of veterans out there who need to hear that truth." that their service mattered, that their struggles matter, that they're not alone. James was quiet for a long moment, staring at the work orders on his desk. "What would you want to know?" "Everything," Sarah said gently. "Your childhood, your decision to enlist, your time in Iraq, coming home, adjusting to civilian life, your relationship with your son, the whole story. Some of that's pretty personal. I know. And you'd have complete control over what gets included and what doesn't. This isn't about sensationalizing your pain, James. It's about honoring your journey." James looked up at her, and for the first time Sarah saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but a willingness to consider the possibility. "Why do you care?" he asked. "I mean, really. Why does my story matter to you?" Sarah thought about the question for a moment. "My grandfather was a veteran," she said finally. "Korean War. He never talked about it much, but I could see it in him. The same thing I see in you. That quiet strength, that sense of carrying something heavy that nobody else understands. He died when I was in college, and I always regretted not asking him more about his experiences. Maybe writing your story is my way of honoring his memory too." James nodded slowly. "What would you need from me?" "Just your time," Sarah said. "A few conversations, maybe a chance to meet your son, to understand what your life looks like now. I promise you, James, I'll treat your story with the respect it deserves." "I don't know about involving Tyler," James said quickly. "Things are complicated between us." "We don't have to include anything you're not comfortable with," Sarah assured him. "This is your story to tell." James was quiet for another long moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the business card Sarah had given him the day before. He had kept it, she noticed, though it was slightly worn around the edges as if he had been handling it. "Okay," he said finally, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" "If at any point I decide I don't want to continue, that's it. No questions asked." "Absolutely," Sarah agreed. "When would be a good time to start?" James looked at his schedule on the wall. "Tomorrow's my day off. We could meet somewhere away from here if that's all right." "Perfect. There's a coffee shop in downtown Foxborough, Murphy's Cafe. Do you know it?" James nodded. "I'll be there at 10. As Sarah packed up her things, she felt a surge of excitement mixed with responsibility. She knew she was being entrusted with something precious. Not just a story, but a life, a journey of pain and perseverance that deserved to be shared with the world. "James," she said, pausing at the door, "thank you for trusting me with this." "Don't thank me yet," James replied with a small smile. "You haven't heard the story." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the interview ahead. She had covered plenty of difficult subjects before: career-ending injuries, personal scandals, family tragedies. But this felt different. This was about more than just getting a good story. This was about giving voice to the voiceless, about honoring sacrifice that too often went unrecognized. She also found herself thinking about James's son, Tyler, about the complicated relationship between a father who had given everything for his country and a young man who had grown up barely knowing that father. Sarah sensed that the key to James's story, and perhaps to his healing, lay in understanding that fractured relationship and the possibility of rebuilding it. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt the familiar thrill that came with the beginning of an important story. But this time, it was tempered with something else. A deep sense of responsibility to do justice to a man who had already given so much and was now willing to give a little more in the hope that his story might help others. Tomorrow would be the beginning of what Sarah sensed would be the most important article of her career. Not because it would win awards or generate clicks, but because it might actually change lives, starting with James Mitchell's own. Murphy's Cafe was exactly the kind of place James Mitchell felt comfortable, unpretentious, quiet, and filled with working-class locals who minded their own business. When Sarah Coleman arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, she found him sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee, and staring out the window at the autumn leaves falling on Main Street. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said, as she slid into the booth across from him. She had dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, hoping to put James at ease. Been coming here for years, James said. Owner's a good guy, hires veterans when he can. Sarah ordered a cappuccino and pulled out her notebook, but she left it closed on the table. Before we start, I want you to know that this is just a conversation. If you want me to turn off my recorder or stop taking notes at any point, just say so. James nodded, though Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Why don't we start at the beginning? Sarah suggested. Tell me about growing up in Alabama. For the next 2 hours, James Mitchell shared his life story in careful, measured sentences. He spoke about his childhood in Mobile, Alabama, where his father worked at the shipyard and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. He was the youngest of 3 children, and the only one who showed any interest in serving his country. My older brother Danny thought I was crazy for enlisting, James said, a sad smile crossing his face. Said I was throwing my life away for politicians who didn't care about people like us. My sister Emma just worried I'd get killed. What made you want to serve? Sarah asked. James was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about how to articulate something he'd never had to explain before. September 11th changed everything for me. I was 29, working construction, living day to day. When I saw those towers fall, saw all those innocent people die, I knew I couldn't just sit on the sidelines. My country needed me, and I needed to be part of something bigger than myself. He enlisted in 2002, just a year after the attacks, and was deployed to Iraq in 2003 as part of the initial invasion force. Sarah could see the pain in his eyes as he talked about those early days, the chaos, the fear, the gradual realization that they were fighting a war with no clear end in sight. First tour was the hardest, James admitted. None of us really knew what we were getting into. But I had good men serving beside me, and we took care of each other. Tell me about your squad, Sarah encouraged. James's face brightened slightly. Best group of guys you could ask for. There was Rodriguez from East L. Cray tough as nails but would give you the shirt off his back. Patterson from Ohio. Kid was only 19 but had more courage than men twice his age. And Sergeant Williams, our squad leader. He's the one who taught me what it really means to lead. Sarah noticed that James spoke about his fellow soldiers in present tense, as if they were still with him. She made a mental note to ask about that later. I did 3 tours total, James continued. 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. By my 3rd deployment, I was a staff sergeant, responsible for training new guys coming in country. It was hard, watching kids barely out of high school trying to make sense of war. Is that when you got injured? James's expression darkened. November 15th, 2009. We were conducting a routine patrol outside Fallujah, checking on a school that had been receiving threats from insurgents. I was in the lead vehicle with Rodriguez and 2 new guys, Jenkins and Murphy. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. The IED was buried in the road about 50 meters from the school. Big one. Probably 2 or 3 artillery shells wired together. When it went off, James trailed off, lost in the memory. Sarah waited patiently, recognizing the signs of someone reliving trauma. Rodriguez died instantly, James said quietly. Jenkins lost both legs. Murphy had internal injuries but survived. Me, I was lucky. Only lost the leg below the knee. But Rodriguez, he was going to get married when he got back home. Had the ring and everything, showed us pictures of his fiancée every day. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and she meant it. 18 months at Walter Reed, James continued, clearly wanting to move past the painful memories. Physical therapy, learning to walk with the prosthetic, psychological counseling. The Army took good care of me. I'll give them that. But the hardest part wasn't the medical stuff. What was the hardest part? Coming home to a family that had moved on without me, James said. Rebecca, my ex-wife, she tried to be supportive, but I could see it in her eyes. I wasn't the same man who had left. And Tyler, he was 8 when I got back, and he looked at me like I was a stranger. Sarah's heart ached as she listened to James describe the slow dissolution of his marriage and his relationship with his son. Rebecca had held the family together during his deployments, making all the decisions, raising Tyler essentially as a single mother. When James returned, disabled and struggling with PTSD, he found himself an outsider in his own home. "I tried to be a good husband and father," James said, "but I was dealing with my own demons, the nightmares, the anxiety, the feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Rebecca deserved better than what I could give her." "What about Tyler? How did he handle everything?" James's face crumpled slightly. He was just a kid. He didn't understand why Daddy was different, why I couldn't play catch like other fathers, why I sometimes woke up screaming in the middle of the night. And I didn't know how to explain it to him. The divorce had been finalized in 2013, with Rebecca getting primary custody and James receiving weekend visitation rights. But as Tyler entered his teenage years, even those visits became less frequent. "He's a good kid," James said. "Smart, athletic, popular at school. But every time I look at him, I see all the years I missed, all the ways I failed him. And I think he sees me as just another obligation, something he has to deal with twice a month." Sarah could hear the deep pain in James's voice, the guilt of a father who felt he had lost his son to circumstances beyond his control. She also sensed that this broken relationship was at the heart of James's struggle to find purpose and meaning in his post-military life. "How did you end up working at Gillette Stadium?" she asked, hoping to steer the conversation toward something more positive. James's expression lifted slightly. "David Parker. He's the head groundskeeper. His brother served with my unit in Afghanistan. When I was struggling to find work, David reached out, said they needed someone reliable for maintenance. Been there 8 years now. What do you like about the job?" "The routine, mostly. I know what's expected of me and I do it well. Plus, being around the Patriots organization, there's something special about it. The way they demand excellence, the way they never give up, no matter what the odds are. It reminds me of the Army in some ways." Sarah leaned forward. "Have you ever met any of the players or coaches?" "Not really. I see them around sometimes, but I'm not the kind of person who bothers people for autographs or pictures. Coach Belichick, though, I see him all the time. Always focused, always thinking about the next play. There's something about him that reminds me of the best officers I served under." "In what way?" "He demands the best from his people, but he also takes care of them. You can see it in how the players respond to him. They'd run through a wall for that man, same way my squad would have done anything Sergeant Williams asked." Sarah made a note about James's admiration for Bill Belichick. She was beginning to see the outline of a story that went beyond just one veteran's struggles. It was about leadership, loyalty, and the different ways people serve something larger than themselves. As their conversation continued, James gradually became more comfortable, sharing details about his daily routine at the stadium, his small apartment in Foxborough, and his ongoing efforts to maintain a relationship with Tyler, despite the distance between them. "I still go to his baseball games when I can," James said. "He's a good player, better than I ever was, but he barely acknowledges me when I'm there. I sit in the stands, cheer when he gets a hit, and drive home alone." "Have you tried talking to him about your military service? About what you went through?" James shook his head. "What's the point? He was too young to understand it then, and now he's got his own life. Besides, kids his age don't want to hear war stories from their old man." Sarah sensed there was more to unpack there, but she could see that James was getting emotionally drained. They had been talking for over 2 hours, and she had gathered enough material for several articles. "James, this has been incredibly helpful," she said, closing her notebook. "Would you be willing to meet again? Maybe next week?" "I suppose so," James said. "But I'm still not sure what kind of story you're going to write from all this." "An honest one," Sarah promised. "A story about service and sacrifice, about the challenges of coming home, and about the quiet dignity of a man who continues to serve his community even when nobody notices." As they prepared to leave, Sarah had one more question. "What do you hope people understand about veterans like you?" James thought for a moment. "I guess that we're not looking for pity or special treatment. We just want to be useful, to feel like our service mattered, and that we still have something to contribute. Most of us aren't heroes. We're just people who answered the call when our country needed us. But that's exactly what makes you heroes, Sarah said softly. James smiled sadly. Tell that to my son. As Sarah drove home that afternoon, she felt the weight of James's story settling over her. She had the framework for a powerful article, but she also sensed that she was only seeing the surface of a much deeper well of pain and resilience. That evening, she called her editor Michael Thompson and gave him an update on her progress. It's a hell of a story, Thompson, she said. But I think there's more to it. I want to try to interview his son, maybe his ex-wife. And I'm starting to think there might be an angle involving the Patriots organization, something about how sports can provide healing and community for veterans. What do you have in mind? Michael asked. I'm not sure yet, Sarah admitted. But I have a feeling this story is bigger than just one veteran's journey. I think it might be about all of us, about how we honor the people who serve, and how we can do better. The next day, Sarah began the delicate process of reaching out to Tyler Mitchell. She found his social media profiles easily enough. He was a typical 17-year-old with Instagram posts about baseball, friends, and school events. But when she sent him a respectful message explaining who she was and asking if he would be willing to talk about his father, she received no response. Sarah decided to try a different approach. She reached out to Tyler's high school baseball coach, Mark Stevens, who had been mentioned in several local newspaper articles about the team's recent success. Coach Stevens, this is Sarah Coleman from the Boston Sports Tribune. I'm working on a story about James Mitchell, and I understand his son Tyler plays for your team. Oh yeah, Tyler's a great kid, Coach Stevens said. One of our best players. But what's this about his father? Sarah explained her project, emphasizing her desire to tell a respectful story about James's service and his current life. She could hear the coach's hesitation through the phone. Look, Ms. Coleman, I don't know James Mitchell very well. He comes to games sometimes, but keeps to himself. But I can tell you that Tyler, well, there's some tension there. The kid's got a lot of anger he's carrying around. What kind of anger? The kind a lot of military kids have, Coach Stevens said carefully. Feeling abandoned, not understanding why their parent chose the military over the family. Tyler's a good kid, but he's built some walls. Might be hard to get him to open up about his father. Sarah thanked the coach and hung up, feeling more determined than ever to understand the full scope of James's story. She spent the rest of the week researching veteran family issues, reading studies about the impact of military deployment on children, and preparing for her next interview with James. The following Tuesday, Sarah met James at Murphy's Cafe again, but this time she had a specific agenda. She wanted to understand more about his relationship with Tyler and explore whether there might be a way to begin healing that fractured bond. I've been thinking about our last conversation, Sarah began. About Tyler. James immediately tensed. I told you, I don't want to drag him into this. I'm not suggesting we drag him into anything, Sarah said gently. But James, from everything you've told me, it's clear that your relationship with your son is one of the most important things in your life, and one of the most painful. What's your point? My point is that maybe this story, telling your story, could be a way to help Tyler understand who you are and what you've been through. Not for the article, but for your relationship with him. James stared into his coffee cup. He doesn't want to understand. He's made that pretty clear. Has he? Or does he just not know how to ask the questions? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed James some research she had been doing. I've been reading about military families, James. Kids who grow up with deployed parents often struggle with feelings of abandonment and anger, but they also desperately want to understand their parents' choice to serve. The problem is, most veterans don't know how to bridge that gap. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe Tyler needs to hear your story, not from a newspaper article, but from you. And maybe you need to hear his side too. James looked skeptical. He won't talk to me about anything important. Our conversations are all surface level: school, baseball, weather. What if I talk to him first? Sarah offered. Not for the article, but just to understand his perspective. Then maybe I could help you figure out how to approach him. I don't know, James said. But Sarah could see he was considering it. James, what's the worst that could happen? He says no, and you're in the same place you are now. But what if he says yes? What if this is the opening you've both been waiting for? After much deliberation, James agreed to let Sarah reach out to Tyler, with the understanding that anything the young man shared would remain confidential unless he specifically agreed to include it in the article. Sarah's breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Instead of trying to contact Tyler directly, she reached out to Rebecca Mitchell, James's ex-wife. She found Rebecca's real estate office online and called during business hours. Mrs. Mitchell? This is Sarah Coleman from the Boston Sports Tribune. I'm working on a story about veterans, and I was hoping to speak with you about your ex-husband James. There was a long pause. What kind of story? A profile piece about his military service and his current work at Gillette Stadium. I'm trying to understand the full scope of his journey, including the impact on his family. I don't know if that's a good idea, Rebecca said carefully. James has been through enough. I completely understand your concern, Sarah said. I'm not looking to sensationalize anything or cause additional pain. I'm hoping to tell a story that honors his service and perhaps helps other veteran families who are dealing with similar challenges. After some discussion, Rebecca agreed to meet Sarah for coffee that weekend. She was a petite woman in her mid-40s with short blonde hair and kind eyes that nonetheless carried traces of old pain. James is a good man, Rebecca said without preamble as they sat down. I want to be clear about that from the start. Our marriage didn't work out, but it wasn't because he's a bad person. What happened? Sarah asked gently. Rebecca sighed. War happened. PTSD happened. A man left for Iraq who never really came home, at least not completely. The James who came back was different, quieter, more distant, struggling with things I couldn't understand or help him with. She described the years after James's return, the medical appointments, the therapy sessions, the gradual realization that their marriage couldn't survive the weight of his trauma and her own exhaustion from years of single parenting. I tried to be supportive, Rebecca said, tears forming in her eyes. But I was dealing with my own issues too. I had been a military wife for 8 years, handling everything alone while he was deployed. When he came back, I thought things would go back to normal, but they couldn't. He needed care and understanding, and Tyler needed a father, and I was caught in the middle trying to be everything to everyone. What about Tyler's relationship with James? Tyler was so excited when James first came home, Rebecca said. He had built up this image of his father as a hero, someone who would teach him to throw a perfect spiral and take him fishing and be the dad he had always imagined. But James was struggling just to get through each day. The nightmares, the doctor appointments, learning to walk with the prosthetic. He didn't have the emotional bandwidth to be the father Tyler needed. How does Tyler feel about James now? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. He's angry, but underneath the anger, he's hurt. He feels like James chose the army over his family, and then when James came back, he chose his own pain over being Tyler's father. It's not fair. Tyler doesn't understand the complexities of PTSD or the challenges James faced. But try explaining that to a teenager who just wants his dad to show up for his life. Do you think Tyler would be willing to talk to me? Maybe, Rebecca said, but you have to understand, Tyler has built walls around this subject. He's learned to live without expecting much from James. I'm not sure he's ready to have those walls challenged. What if James approached him differently? What if he was more open about his experiences, about why things have been so difficult? Rebecca looked thoughtful. James has always tried to protect Tyler from the darker parts of his experience. Maybe he's been protecting him too much. That evening, Rebecca talked to Tyler about Sarah's project. The conversation didn't go well initially. Tyler was suspicious of anyone wanting to write about his father and resistant to the idea of dredging up old family pain. But Rebecca was persistent. Tyler, your father has been struggling for years to figure out how to connect with you, she told him. Maybe this is an opportunity for both of you to understand each other better. What's to understand, Mom? Tyler replied. He chose the army over us. When he came back, he chose feeling sorry for himself over being my dad. End of story. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Isn't it? I've been to therapy, Mom. I know all about PTSD and military families and deployment cycles. But at some point, don't people have to take responsibility for their choices? Rebecca could see the pain beneath her son's anger. What if I told you that your father talks about you all the time, that he comes to your games even though you barely acknowledge him, that he's proud of you but doesn't know how to tell you? Then maybe he should try harder, Tyler said. But his voice lacked conviction. After several more conversations, Tyler reluctantly agreed to meet with Sarah, with the condition that his mother would be present and that nothing would be published without his explicit consent. The meeting took place at Rebecca's house on a Saturday afternoon. Tyler was a tall, athletic 17-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's expressive eyes. He sat stiffly on the living room couch, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Tyler, I want you to know that I'm not here to judge anyone or to try to fix your relationship with your father, Sarah began. I'm just trying to understand the full story. What do you want to know? Tyler asked, his tone guarded. How do you remember your father before he deployed? Tyler's expression softened slightly. He was everything to me. He taught me to ride a bike, played catch with me in the backyard, read me stories before bed. When he left for Iraq, I used to count the days until he would come home. What was it like when he came back? Confusing, Tyler said quietly. He looked different, thinner, sadder, and he couldn't do a lot of the things he used to do. But I thought that was just temporary, you know? I thought once he got better, things would go back to normal. But they didn't? Tyler shook his head. He was always tired, always in pain. When I tried to show him my baseball trophies or tell him about school, he seemed like he was somewhere else. And Mom was always stressed, always worried about him. It felt like I was the only one in the family who didn't matter anymore. Sarah could see the hurt in Tyler's eyes as he spoke. Did you ever talk to your father about how you were feeling? I tried when I was younger, but he would just say he was sorry and that he was doing his best. After a while, I stopped trying. Do you understand now what he was going through? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Intellectually, yeah. I know about PTSD. I know war changes people. But emotionally, it's hard to forgive someone for not being there when you needed them, even if they had good reasons. What would you want to say to him if you could say anything? Tyler looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. I'd want to tell him that I needed him to fight for our relationship the way he fought for his country. I needed him to show me that I was worth the effort, even when it was hard. And what would you want to hear from him? I'd want to hear that he's sorry, not just for the big things, but for all the little things too. For missing my games, for being distracted during our visits, for making me feel like I wasn't important enough to fight his demons for. After the interview, Sarah felt like she finally understood the full scope of the story she was telling. It wasn't just about one veteran's journey. It was about the ripple effects of war on families, about the challenge of reconnecting after trauma, and about the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. The next day, she called James and asked to meet with him again. I talked to Tyler, she said without preamble when they sat down at Murphy's Cafe. James's face went pale. What did he say? He said he misses his father, Sarah said gently. And he said he's been waiting for you to fight for your relationship the way you fought for your country. James was quiet for a long time, processing Sarah's words. I don't know how to do that. Maybe you start by telling him the truth about what you went through over there, about why you've struggled to connect, about how much he means to you. What if it's too late? James, Tyler is 17 years old. He's going to be 18 soon, and then he'll be off to college. You have a small window here to rebuild your relationship, but it's not too late. Not if you're willing to be vulnerable with him. I've spent years trying to protect him from the darkness of what I experienced. Maybe he doesn't need protection anymore. Maybe he needs understanding. That night, James lay awake thinking about Sarah's words. For years, He had convinced himself that keeping Tyler at arm's length was the kindest thing he could do, that his son was better off without a broken father complicating his life. But what if he had been wrong? What if Tyler needed to see his father's struggles in order to understand his own? The next morning, James did something he hadn't done in months. He picked up his phone and called Tyler directly. "Tyler? It's Dad. I was wondering, would you like to have dinner this week?" "Just the two of us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," Tyler said finally. "But I get to pick the place." "Deal," James said, feeling a flutter of hope in his chest for the first time in years. As Sarah continued working on her article over the following weeks, she watched James and Tyler take tentative steps toward rebuilding their relationship. The process wasn't easy. There were awkward silences, difficult conversations, and moments when both father and son seemed ready to retreat to their old patterns of distance and protection. But slowly, something began to shift. James started sharing stories about his military service, not the traumatic parts, but the brotherhood he had found with his fellow soldiers, the sense of purpose that had driven him to serve, the pride he felt in protecting his country and his family. Tyler, in turn, began to open up about his own struggles, the confusion he had felt growing up, the anger that had built up over the years, and the love for his father that he had never stopped feeling, even when it seemed hopeless. Sarah documented some of these conversations, with both father and son's permission, but she also gave them space to work on their relationship away from her journalistic eye. She sensed that her role was becoming less about telling their story and more about facilitating their healing. It was during one of these family dinners that Tyler mentioned something that would change the trajectory of Sarah's article entirely. "Dad," Tyler said, as they sat in a small Italian restaurant in Foxborough, "I've been thinking about what you do at the stadium. Have you ever met Coach Belichick?" "I've seen him around," James said. "Why?" "I was just thinking, he's supposed to be this amazing leader, right? Someone who really understands how to get the best out of people. Maybe you should talk to him." "About what?" Tyler shrugged. "I don't know. About leadership, about service, about what it means to be part of a team. You always say he reminds you of your military commanders." Sarah, who was listening to this conversation with Tyler's permission, felt a spark of inspiration. What if the story wasn't just about James's individual journey? What if it was about the connections between military and athletic leadership, between the brotherhood of soldiers and the brotherhood of teammates? And what if, somehow, Bill Belichick himself could be part of the healing process? The idea seemed far-fetched, but as Sarah thought about it more, she began to see the possibilities. She had press credentials, she had access to the Patriots organization, and she had a story that could resonate with anyone who understood the value of service and leadership. It was time to think bigger. Sarah Coleman had covered the New England Patriots for 6 years, but she had never requested a one-on-one interview with Bill Belichick. The legendary coach was notoriously selective about his media interactions, preferring to focus on football rather than human interest stories. But as Sarah sat in her car outside Gillette Stadium on a cold November morning, she knew she had to try. The Patriots' media relations director, Kevin Walsh, had been skeptical when Sarah first approached him about the interview request. Coach Belichick doesn't typically do feature stories about individual fans or employees, Walsh had told her over the phone. His focus is on the team and the game. This isn't just about one employee, Sarah had explained. It's about leadership, service, and the connections between military and athletic excellence. I think Coach Belichick would understand the parallels. After some persistence and a detailed explanation of James Mitchell's story, Walsh had agreed to present the request to Belichick. To Sarah's surprise, the coach had agreed to a brief meeting, not for an interview necessarily, but to discuss the story and see if there was merit to her idea. Now, as Sarah walked through the familiar corridors of Gillette Stadium toward Belichick's office, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about getting a good quote or adding star power to her article. This was about potentially creating something meaningful for James Mitchell, a man who had given so much and received so little recognition in return. Belichick's office was smaller than Sarah had expected, filled with game film, playbooks, and memorabilia from his decades in coaching. The man himself was seated behind a modest desk, wearing his characteristic hoodie and studying what appeared to be defensive formations on his computer screen. "Ms. Coleman," he said, looking up as she entered. "Kevin tells me you have an interesting story about one of our maintenance staff." "Thank you for taking the time to see me, Coach," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I know how busy you are." "Tell me about this veteran," Belichick said, cutting straight to the point. Sarah gave him a concise but comprehensive overview of James Mitchell's story, his military service, his injury, his struggles with civilian life, and his 8 years of dedicated work at Gillette Stadium. She emphasized James's character, his work ethic, and his quiet dignity in the face of ongoing personal challenges. Belichick listened without interruption, occasionally nodding but giving no indication of his thoughts. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said finally. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "Maybe nothing. But I've been thinking about the parallels between military leadership and what you do here. The way you build team culture, the way you demand excellence while taking care of your people, the way you create brotherhood and purpose. James talks about you with the same respect he had for his commanding officers." "He's never spoken to me directly," Belichick pointed out. "No, but he's observed you for 8 years. He sees how you interact with players, how you handle adversity, how you maintain standards. In his mind, you represent the same kind of leadership he experienced in the military." Belichick leaned back in his chair, considering. "What's his situation with his family?" Sarah was surprised by the question, but answered honestly. "He's been divorced for several years, has a 17-year-old son who he's trying to reconnect with. It's been difficult. The kid feels abandoned, the father feels guilty, but they're making progress. Kids that age need to understand that service means sacrifice," Belichick said quietly. "But they also need to see that the sacrifice was worth something." Sarah sensed an opening. "James has never felt like his service was properly recognized or valued. He came home broken, struggled to find his place, and has spent years feeling invisible. Working here has given him purpose, but he's still carrying a lot of pain." Belichick was quiet again, and Sarah could almost see him processing the information, the way he might analyze game film or evaluate a player. "I'll tell you what," he said finally. "I'd like to meet this James Mitchell. Not for your story, not for publicity, but because I want to understand who he is and what he's contributed here." "Really?" "I make it my business to know the people who make this organization successful," Belichick said. "If he's been here 8 years and I haven't taken the time to acknowledge his service, that's my failure, not his." Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "How would you want to arrange that?" "Through normal channels. Have Kevin set up a meeting. I want to talk to him about his work here, his military background, what the Patriots organization means to him. No media, no cameras, just a conversation." As Sarah prepared to leave, Belichick added, "Ms. Coleman, I want to be clear about something. If this meeting happens, it's not a publicity stunt. It's not about your article. It's about recognizing someone who deserves recognition. I understand completely, Coach. And if James Mitchell is the kind of man you've described, he won't want a lot of fanfare. He'll want something meaningful." Sarah left the meeting with her head spinning. She had hoped for a quote, maybe a small gesture of acknowledgement. Instead, she might have opened the door to something much more significant. The next day, Kevin Walsh called James directly and asked him to come to the coach's office for a meeting. James was terrified. "What did I do wrong?" he asked Sarah when she called to check on him. "Am I getting fired?" "James, you haven't done anything wrong. Coach Belichick wants to meet you because he respects what you do here." "I don't understand." "Just go to the meeting," Sarah encouraged. "Be yourself. Tell him about your work, your service, what the Patriots mean to you." The meeting between James Mitchell and Bill Belichick lasted 45 minutes. Neither man spoke to Sarah about the details, but when James emerged from the coach's office, he looked like a different person. There was something in his posture, something in his eyes, that suggested a burden had been lifted. "How did it go?" Sarah asked when she caught up with James later that day. "He knew," James said quietly. "He knew about my military record, about my injury, about my family situation. He'd done his homework." "What did you talk about?" "Leadership, sacrifice, what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. He told me that the way I approach my work here, the attention to detail, the reliability, the pride in the organization, reminds him of the best military personnel he's known." James paused, clearly emotional. He said something I'll never forget. He said that every great organization is built on people who do their jobs with excellence, even when nobody's watching. He called me a foundational player. "That's incredible, James." "But that's not the best part," James continued. "He asked me about Tyler, about our relationship. When I told him we were working on rebuilding it, he said something about how the best leaders find ways to bring their teams together, even when it seems impossible." "What do you think he meant by that?" James smiled. The first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in all their conversations. "I think he meant that it's not too late to be the father Tyler needs me to be." Over the following weeks, Sarah watched as James and Tyler continued to strengthen their relationship. They had dinner every Thursday, attended Patriots games together when James could get tickets, and slowly began to share the parts of themselves they had kept hidden for so many years. Tyler started asking questions about his father's military service, not just the basic facts, but the deeper truths about why James had chosen to serve, what he had experienced overseas, and how those experiences had shaped him. James, in turn, began sharing stories about the brotherhood he had found in the army, the pride he felt in serving his country, and the ongoing struggle to find that same sense of purpose in civilian life. "Dad," Tyler said one evening as they watched game film together. James had started sharing his deep knowledge of football strategy with his son. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for your military service, but for how hard you've worked to be a good father, even when I made it difficult." "You didn't make anything difficult, son," James replied. "I just didn't know how to show you that you were the most important thing in my life." It was during one of these father-son conversations that Tyler came up with an idea that would change everything. "Dad, Veterans Day is coming up, and the Patriots always do something special to honor military members. What if Coach Belichick knew about your story? Really knew it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if there was a way to honor you publicly? To let people know about your service and what you mean to this organization?" James looked uncomfortable. "Tyler, I don't need that kind of attention. Maybe you don't need it, but maybe other people need to see it. Maybe other veterans need to see that their service matters, that people appreciate what they've done." When Tyler shared this idea with Sarah, she felt the final piece of her story clicking into place. She reached out to Kevin Walsh again, this time with a specific proposal. "What if we arranged for James to be honored during the Veterans Day game?" she asked. "Nothing elaborate, just a recognition of his service and his contribution to the organization." Walsh was intrigued but cautious. "What kind of recognition are you thinking about?" "Maybe he could be introduced to the crowd, maybe participate in the coin toss or the flag presentation, something that shows respect for his service and his role here." Walsh promised to discuss it with Coach Belichick. 2 days later, he called Sarah back with news that exceeded her wildest expectations. "Coach Belichick wants to do something special for James," Walsh said. "But he wants it to be meaningful, not just ceremonial. He's got an idea, but he'll need James's permission and cooperation." "What kind of idea?" "You'll have to ask Coach Belichick yourself. He wants to meet with you again." When Sarah returned to Belichick's office, she found the coach studying what appeared to be organizational charts and personnel files. "Ms. Coleman," he said as she sat down, "I've been thinking about your friend James Mitchell." "What kind of thinking, Coach?" "The kind of thinking I do when I see potential that's not being fully utilized," Belichick said. "James has been working in maintenance for 8 years, but his military background suggests he's capable of much more. Leadership experience, strategic thinking, attention to detail. These are qualities we value in every part of our organization. Sarah wasn't sure where this was going, but she could sense something significant building. I've been talking to our facilities management team, Belichick continued. We have an opening for an assistant facilities coordinator, someone who would oversee maintenance operations for the entire stadium complex. It's a supervisory role with better pay and more responsibility. It's also a position that would put James in direct contact with players, coaches, and front office staff. Are you offering James a promotion? I'm offering him recognition for what he's already been doing, plus an opportunity to do more. But here's the thing. I want to announce this promotion during our Veterans Day ceremony. I want James and his son to be on the field before the game, and I want the entire stadium to know about his military service and his contribution to this organization. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Coach, that's incredible. It's overdue, Belichick said simply. James Mitchell has been serving this organization with the same excellence he brought to serving his country. It's time we acknowledge that publicly. What would the ceremony involve? James and Tyler would be our honorary captains for the coin toss. I'd introduce them personally to the crowd, sharing James's military background and his role here. Then I'd announce his promotion to the new position. Simple, respectful, but meaningful. Sarah was almost speechless. Have you discussed this with James? Not yet. I wanted to run it by you first, since you've been the bridge between us. Do you think he'd be willing? I think, Sarah said carefully, that this might be exactly what he needs to understand that his service, both military and civilian, has been valued all along. That evening, Sarah called James and asked if she could come by his apartment. When she arrived, she found him and Tyler working together on a model airplane, a hobby they had recently rediscovered as a way to spend time together. James, she said, settling onto his couch, I have something to tell you about Coach Belichick's plans for Veterans Day. As she explained the promotion and the ceremony, Sarah watched James's face go through a series of emotions: surprise, disbelief, gratitude, and finally, a kind of quiet pride she had never seen in him before. He wants to do all that for me, James asked. He wants to do it because you've earned it, Sarah replied. 8 years of dedicated service, military leadership experience, and the kind of character this organization values. Tyler looked at his father with obvious pride. Dad, this is amazing. You're going to be on the field at Gillette Stadium in front of 65,000 people. I don't know if I can handle that kind of attention, James said quietly. You handled 3 tours in Iraq, Tyler pointed out. I think you can handle a few minutes of applause. James looked at his son, then at Sarah. What would I have to do? Just be yourself, Sarah said. Let Coach Belichick tell your story. Let the crowd show their appreciation, and accept a promotion you've already earned 10 times over. And Tyler would be with me? Right beside you, Sarah confirmed. James was quiet for a long moment, then looked at his son. What do you think, Tyler? Your old man on the big screen at Gillette Stadium? I think, Tyler said, his voice thick with emotion, that it's about time people knew what kind of hero my father really is. The weeks leading up to Veterans Day were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah worked closely with the Patriots media team to craft the perfect introduction for James, balancing respect for his privacy with the desire to properly honor his service. James underwent media training to prepare for the attention, though Belichick assured him that the focus would be on recognition, not interviews. Most importantly, James and Tyler spent those weeks continuing to rebuild their relationship. The upcoming ceremony seemed to give them both a focal point for their healing, a public acknowledgement that James's service, both military and paternal, had value and meaning. 3 days before the game, James received an unexpected visitor at the stadium. David Parker, the head groundskeeper who had first encouraged James to attend a game as a fan, knocked on the maintenance office door with a huge grin on his face. James, I just heard about Sunday, David said. Man, I am so proud of you, and I have something for you. David handed James a small wrapped package. Inside was a Patriots pin, Not the standard fan merchandise, but a special commemorative pin given only to long-term employees and honored guests. "I've been saving this for 8 years," David said, "waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I think Sunday qualifies." James held the pin in his hands, feeling its weight. It was such a small thing, but it represented something huge. Acceptance, recognition, belonging. "Thank you, David," James said, "for everything. For giving me this job, for being a friend, for believing I belonged here even when I didn't believe it myself." "James," David said seriously, "you've belonged here from day one. It just took the rest of us a while to properly show it." As Veterans Day dawned bright and cold, James Mitchell stood in his small apartment bathroom, adjusting the tie Tyler had helped him pick out. In a few hours, he would walk onto the field at Gillette Stadium as an honored guest rather than an invisible employee. His son would be beside him, his service would be recognized, and his future would be brighter than he had dared to imagine just a few months earlier. But more than any of that, James Mitchell finally understood what Bill Belichick had meant about being a foundational player. He had spent 8 years serving the Patriots organization with the same dedication he had brought to serving his country. He had built something valuable through consistency, excellence, and quiet pride. And now, for the first time since returning from Iraq, James Mitchell felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The ceremony was set to begin in 3 hours. James Mitchell, Tyler Mitchell, and 65,000 Patriots fans were about to share a moment that none of them would ever forget. Epilogue. The Honor Guard. As James Mitchell walked through the players' tunnel toward the field at Gillette Stadium, he felt the same nervous energy he had experienced before his first patrol in Iraq. Beside him, Tyler squeezed his father's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. "You ready for this, Dad?" Tyler asked, his voice barely audible over the pre-game music echoing through the stadium. "As ready as I'll ever be," James replied, adjusting the Patriots pin on his jacket lapel. The tunnel opened onto the field, and James was momentarily overwhelmed by the sight of 65,000 people in the stands, most wearing Patriots red, white, and blue. The field itself looked impossibly green and perfect under the bright lights. And James realized that after 8 years of maintaining this facility, he was finally experiencing it the way it was meant to be experienced. Bill Belichick approached them near the 50-yard line, extending his hand to James with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "James," the coach said, "thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you've done for this organization." "Thank you for this opportunity, Coach," James replied. "I still can't quite believe it's happening." "Believe it," Belichick said firmly. "You've earned every bit of recognition you're about to receive." Sarah Coleman watched from the press box, her laptop open but forgotten as she prepared to witness the culmination of the story she had been following for months. She could see James and Tyler on the field below, and even from this distance, she could tell that something profound was happening. Not just for them, but for everyone who would witness this moment. The public address announcer's voice boomed across the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to midfield for a special Veterans Day presentation." The crowd quieted, and James felt every eye in the stadium focusing on him. For a moment, the old instinct to retreat, to become invisible, threatened to overwhelm him. But then he felt Tyler's steady presence beside him and remembered Coach Belichick's words about foundational players. "Today, we have the honor of recognizing one of our own," the announcer continued. "Staff Sergeant James Mitchell served 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he was wounded in action while protecting his fellow soldiers and the freedoms we all cherish." A ripple of applause began in the stands, growing steadily as the announcer continued. After his military service, James joined the Patriots family 8 years ago as a maintenance supervisor. Day after day, year after year, he has served this organization with the same dedication and excellence he brought to serving his country. Today, we promote him to Assistant Facilities Coordinator, and we honor both his military service and his unwavering commitment to the Patriots. The applause erupted into a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the entire stadium. James looked up at the crowd and saw thousands of people on their feet, many of them wiping tears from their eyes. Veterans in the crowd saluted. Families held up signs thanking military members. The noise was deafening, but to James it sounded like the most beautiful music he had ever heard. Joining James today is his son Tyler, a senior at Foxborough High School and a standout baseball player who will be attending Boston University next fall on an academic scholarship. Tyler blushed as the camera found him, but he stood tall beside his father, pride evident in every line of his posture. Bill Belichick stepped forward and took the microphone. The stadium fell silent again, everyone understanding that when Coach Belichick spoke, you listened. In my 40-plus years in football, I've learned that great organizations are built on great people, Belichick began, his voice carrying clearly through the stadium's sound system. People who show up every day, who do their jobs with excellence, who care about something bigger than themselves. He turned to look directly at James. Staff Sergeant Mitchell embodies everything we value in this organization: leadership, sacrifice, dedication, excellence. For 8 years, he has been a foundational part of what makes this place special, and today, we want to make sure he knows it. The crowd erupted again, and this time, James found himself unable to hold back his emotions. Tears streamed down his face as he looked up at the sea of appreciative faces, as he felt Tyler's arm around his shoulders, as he experienced something he had thought was lost forever. The knowledge that his service mattered, that he was valued, that he belonged. But Coach Belichick wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," the coach said, raising his hand to quiet the crowd. "Today is about honoring veterans, but it's also about family. James, your son Tyler wanted to say something to you, and we thought 65,000 people might be the right audience." Tyler stepped forward, and suddenly the teenager who had been so angry and distant just months before was speaking into the microphone with confidence and love. "Dad," Tyler began, his voice strong despite the emotion behind it. "For most of my life, I didn't understand why you left us to serve your country. I didn't understand why you came back different, why you struggled, why it seemed like the war was more important than our family." James felt his heart breaking as his son spoke the truth they had both carried for so long. "But now I understand," Tyler continued. "You didn't leave us to serve. You served to protect us. You didn't come back different because you didn't love us. You came back carrying the weight of protecting all of us. And you've never stopped serving, never stopped protecting, never stopped showing up, even when I made it hard for you." Tyler's voice broke slightly, but he pushed forward. "You taught me what it means to be a man, what it means to serve something bigger than yourself, what it means to keep going even when everything seems impossible. I'm proud to be your son, Dad. I'm proud of your service to our country, and I'm proud of your service to this team and this community." Tyler paused, looking directly at his father. "Most of all, I'm proud that you never gave up on us, even when I gave up on you." The stadium exploded in applause so loud that it seemed to make the ground shake. James pulled Tyler into a hug, both father and son crying openly as 65,000 people celebrated their reconciliation, their love, and their shared journey from brokenness to healing. As the noise gradually subsided, Coach Belichick stepped forward one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "your honorary captains for today's coin toss, Staff Sergeant James Mitchell and his son Tyler Mitchell." The Buffalo Bills captains jogged out to midfield, and James found himself shaking hands with professional athletes who looked at him with genuine respect and gratitude. The referee explained the coin toss procedure, but James barely heard him. He was still processing the fact that he was standing on the field he had cleaned and maintained for 8 years, finally experiencing it as it was meant to be experienced. "Call it in the air," the referee said, flipping the coin high into the November sky. "Heads," James called out, his voice strong and clear. The coin landed heads up, and the crowd cheered again. The Bills captain chose to defer, and James got to make his first official decision as an honorary captain. The Patriots would receive the ball to start the game. As they walked off the field, Tyler grinned at his father. "So, how does it feel to be famous?" "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," James replied, "with exactly the right person beside me." Sarah Coleman watched the ceremony from the press box, tears streaming down her face as she typed notes for what she knew would be the most important article of her career. This wasn't just a story about one veteran's journey. It was a story about the power of recognition, the possibility of healing, and the way communities can come together to honor those who serve. But more than anything, it was a story about love. The love between a father and son, the love of country and community, and the love that can heal even the deepest wounds when people are willing to be vulnerable with each other. The Patriots won the game 35-17, but that wasn't the story anyone would remember from that Veterans Day. The story was about James Mitchell, who had served his country with honor, served his community with dedication, and finally received the recognition he had earned, but never expected. The story was about Tyler Mitchell, who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting our pain and choosing to forgive. The story was about Bill Belichick, who had shown that true leadership means seeing and honoring the contributions of everyone in your organization, no matter how invisible they might seem. And the story was about a community of 65,000 people who had stood as one to honor service, sacrifice, and the enduring power of family. 3 months later, Sarah's article about James Mitchell would win a Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. But on that Veterans Day afternoon, as James walked back through the tunnel with his son's arm around his shoulder and his new position waiting for him on Monday morning, he wasn't thinking about awards or recognition. He was thinking about how sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you a second chance to be the person you always wanted to be. He was thinking about how sometimes the longest journey is the one that brings you home to yourself. And he was thinking about how grateful he was to have learned that no act of service, no matter how small or invisible, is ever truly unseen. Because somewhere, someone is watching, someone cares, and someone will make sure that your sacrifice is honored. As father and son disappeared into the tunnel, the crowd was still on its feet, still applauding, still celebrating the moment when Bill Belichick had honored a war veteran on the field and brought an entire stadium to its feet. But James Mitchell knew the truth. The real honor wasn't in the ceremony or the promotion or the recognition. The real honor was in the second chance he had been given to be Tyler's father, and Tyler's willingness to let him try again. Everything else was just the blessing that came with it.